The delicate art of dating. A concept as old as the cosmos itself, and as absurd as the beings who partake in it. From ancient Greek warriors to sly fox spirits, love and its rituals transcend all forms of existence, defying the laws of time, space, and sanity. Today, however, we were treated to a particularly delightful attempt at it. A Hydra, with its many bickering heads, preparing for an evening with none other than the nine-tailed Kitsune. A creature of such grace and trickery that even the stars themselves would balk in awe. Let me tell you, it was a spectacle of cosmic proportions. A date that was bound to fail spectacularly, if only because the Hydra's heads couldn't agree on anything, much less how to impress a being as multifaceted as Kitsune. It all started, of course, with the Hydra's usual pre-date ritual, endless bickering. The creature slithered into Croissant Shan's bakery, a place where reality itself often gets a little wobbly, thanks to the owner's chaotic nature. But as always, there they were, those many heads of the Hydra, debating how to approach their date. I think we should get her flowers, the first head squeaked, its voice a thin, tremulous thing. It was practically quivering with uncertainty. But no, what if she's allergic? She looks so refined, so elegant. Should we bring her chocolates? Maybe chocolates would be better. Ancient Greece didn't have flowers in the same way. Oh gods, what if that's too boring? I don't know what she wants. Flowers. Ridiculous, rumbled the second head, its deep voice carrying the confidence of a would-be conqueror. We'll show her strength, dominance. That's how it's done. I'm thinking a little heroic declaration of respect, like the great Achilles would do. She'll know exactly what kind of creature she's dealing with. Respect. Who needs respect when you've got food? Muttered the third head, its tone so distracted that it might as well have been daydreaming of spanakopita. We'll just feed her. Everyone loves food, right? You can't go wrong with baklava. Baklava is classic. It's ancient Greek. I could hardly suppress a cosmic chuckle as I listened to this delightful mess. Each head was so determined to win the favor of the Kitsune. Each so convinced that their method was the right one. But as I well knew this date was destined for disaster, the Hydra's heads couldn't even agree on the basics, let alone how to impress someone who had lived for millennia and could probably see right through all their efforts. And then she arrived. Kitsune, the one and only. Grace itself in the form of a nine-tailed fox. She entered the bakery as though she were stepping through the veil between worlds, her tail swaying behind her like an orchestra of ethereal power. With each movement, reality itself seemed to bend just slightly, enough to make those heads spin. I could tell immediately that she wasn't here to merely play the game of love. No, she was here for the amusement. To see how far she could push the Hydra, how much she could twist their desperate attempts into something far more entertaining. The Hydra's heads froze the moment they laid eyes on her, each one aware that their plan had already gone off the rails, but too proud to back down. Well, Kitsune said, her voice a melody of amusement. What a delightful collection of personalities you have here. The Hydra's head scrambled, desperate to regain some shred of control. Of course, none of them could agree on who should take the lead. I'll bow, stammered the first head, the one most riddled with anxiety. It's a gesture of respect. In ancient Greece, the bow meant respect, right? It's, traditional. The head's voice faltered as it awkwardly dipped low, trying to make the gesture as dignified as possible. The second head, no doubt the most heroic of the bunch, scoffed. "Respect? No, we're not doing that. I'll show her strength, the way any true Greek warrior would. It puffed out its chest, visibly trying to appear imposing, though, frankly, it looked more like an overinflated balloon. "I'll declare my greatness." Meanwhile, the third head, distracted as ever, sniffed the air with a dreamy sigh. "Baklava," it said. "Do you smell that? Baklava." Kitsune's smile widened. She was absolutely loving this. She leaned against the counter of Croissant Chan's bakery with the air of someone who had seen this sort of thing 1,000 times. "Ah," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You think my tails are individuals, don't you?" She gave a slight nod, and the 9 tails swished behind her with purpose. "They each have their own personalities, much like your heads." She let that hang in the air for a moment, watching as the Hydra's heads exchanged confused glances. One of the heads blinked, utterly flabbergasted. "Wait, so each tail is like us? They're separate individuals?" Kitsune's eyes glimmered with mischief. "Oh yes," she said softly. "This one," she gestured to her first tail, "is the quiet one. It doesn't speak much, but it's always aware of everything around it." The Hydra's first head nodded sagely, as if it understood this. "Ah, yes, I can relate to that. And this one," Kitsune said, pointing to another tail, "is the playful one. A bit chaotic but fun. It's the one that brings a little excitement to the group." The heads, of course, immediately began arguing. Which tail was the most important? Which one was in charge? They had already forgotten the purpose of their date, of course. Now they were competing to figure out which of Kitsune's tails was the most dominant, the most impressive. Kitsune, meanwhile, was a picture of calm, watching them with quiet amusement. She played them like an expert, letting each head try and fail to win her favor in increasingly absurd ways. She was not just entertaining herself. She was toying with them, like a cat with a particularly dim-witted mouse. The heads kept debating, as they always did, each one trying to impress her in its own special way, and all the while, Kitsune remained serene, her smile a little wider with every quibble, every misstep. After all, what is love but the art of provoking chaos and reveling in its beauty? And Croissant Chan and I, we simply watched, excessively cleaning the bakery while savoring every moment of this bizarre monster of romance unraveling before us. It was particularly fun because Kitsune knew exactly what she was doing as she stood there, watching the Hydra's head squabble over the most trivial of things. It wasn't so much that she wanted to disrupt them, it was that she couldn't resist. Why, after all, would anyone in their right mind allow such an amusing opportunity to slip by? She stood, arms crossed, leaning lazily against the counter of Croissant Chan's bakery, every inch of her demeanor oozing calm amusement. The Hydra's heads continued to argue over her tails, one declaring each tail as an individual being to be respected, another fixated on the chaos of her playful one, and yet another, still, trying to convince itself that the entire situation was, indeed, about food. And Kitsune, she was the embodiment of patience. Not the kind of patience you'd expect from a wise elder, but the kind that was born from knowing exactly how long it would take for everything to fall apart. The first head, after failing to assert its wisdom, looked to her with a nervous twitch of its many eyes. So, this one is quiet, you say. Observant, you said. I can understand that. I too, at times, silent. The head almost sounded like it was trying to make peace with her. It was almost touching in its desperation. Kitsune's smile grew a bit wider, but she didn't say anything. No, she simply tilted her head, the serene elegance of her posture like that of a traditional shrine maiden. And yet there was something else there too, a flicker in her eye that said, I know you don't have the faintest clue what's going on, but I'm going to enjoy this ride anyway. One of her tails flicked, catching the light in a way that drew all the Hydra's attention. Each of them. This one, Kitsune began gesturing to the next tail, is the playful one. It loves to cause mischief. It's always stirring up trouble, but there's a method to the madness. You see, chaos is only truly effective when it's calculated. She looked at each of the heads in turn, her eyes twinkling with that elusive magic only a trickster knows. I imagine you'd get along with this one. The second head blinked in disbelief, its tone suddenly much more uncertain. Chaos, calculated chaos. The idea clearly rattled it, which, if you ask me, was exactly what Kitsune wanted. There was no need to make it too easy for them. The fun was in watching them get lost in their own confusion. The third head, however, was too caught up in its obsession with pie to be of any help. But wait, she's sly. She must be a fox, right? The head looked at her, eyes narrowed. I think we need to prove that we're worthy of her slyness. Kitsune let out a quiet laugh, her voice almost musical. Oh, you think you can prove your worth? She shook her head, as though gently dismissing the idea. The more you try to prove yourselves, the more ridiculous you look. The heads all paused for a moment, their mouths opening and closing like fish out of water. They looked at each other, unsure whether to argue or agree, and in the process, they managed to make themselves look even more inept. Kitsune, of course, could see this clearly. She had them wrapped around her finger with ease, and she didn't even need to lift a tail to do it. It was almost too easy. One head, clearly frustrated by the other's inability to gain any traction, turned to her with newfound determination. All right then, we will just have to show you what we're capable of. We will sing to you. Yes, we shall serenade you in the style of the great poets of Greece. It said this with such confidence, as though it had just discovered the key to eternal romance. Kitsune raised an eyebrow, her tail swishing lazily behind her. Sing. Oh, I do love a good serenade, she said with mock enthusiasm. She leaned in slightly, her voice a sultry whisper that made each head lean forward in eager anticipation. But I'm afraid I must warn you, if your song is anything less than divine, you might not be able to stop my laugh. The Hydra's heads hesitated. The first one had already started singing poorly, something off-key that could have killed a lesser being's ears. It was tragic. The second head tried to drown out the first by picking a different tune, equally terrible. Kitsune didn't even flinch. She simply stood there, letting the dissonant chaos unfold before her, her expression one of pure amusement. She knew what was coming, and she knew it would be delicious. As the Hydra's head sang on, each voice clashing horribly with the others, Kitsune raised a hand, signaling for silence. She smiled, the same sharp grin that always meant trouble. She wasn't angry or dismissive. No, she was a fox at play, and they had fallen straight into her trap. She said, drawing their attention back to her. I'm afraid you have made a grievous mistake. She leaned forward, her voice taking on that playful edge. You see, I do love a good song, but I don't believe this is what I had in mind. If you want to impress me, my dear Hydra, you must be better than this. The heads fell silent for a moment, staring at her in complete confusion. Kitsune couldn't help herself. She smiled sweetly, then leaned back against the counter again, looking them up and down as though they were just another amusing spectacle to observe. But then again, she added, her voice almost lazily bored now. If you don't want to try harder, I suppose I can simply enjoy watching you fail. That has its own appeal too. This was the moment. The Hydra's heads, already fighting against their own insecurities, couldn't even come close to understanding the depths of the game Kitsune was playing. But they were caught, trapped in their own assumptions. They had no idea how to handle someone like her, and Kitsune, with all her trickster wit and sly charm, wasn't about to make it easy. On the other hand, she wanted the date to continue because it had been a long time since she was out of Japan in the first place. And the fun was just getting started because the date was about to be interrupted by an Olympian. If you're thinking it's Zeus after my many podcast monologues, you'd be forgiven for that educated guess. But no, it was his son, Hercules, a true hero, in the sense that he often misunderstood everything around him while attempting to save the day with far more muscle than brains. You've got to appreciate the effort, if nothing else. But if you think you're in for a moment of heroic glory, you're in for a surprise. Because nothing makes a dramatic entrance more ridiculous than mistaking a fox's playful mischief for an actual damsel in distress. Hercules, bless his heart, strode into Croissant Chan's bakery like a goddamn hurricane. The door slammed open with a force that probably shook several dimensions, and in came the golden-haired, muscles on muscles demigod himself. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't elegant, and it certainly wasn't necessary, but it was quintessential Hercules. By the gods, he boomed, voice as loud as a thunderclap. What foul sorcery is this? I see you, vile beast. He pointed dramatically at the Hydra, who was still in the middle of arguing with itself, by the way, trying to figure out if it should serenade Kitsune with more off-key singing or offer her yet another pie. The Hydra paused, blinking, its many heads looking at Hercules in unison. Though, let's be clear, none of them seemed particularly fazed. To be fair, the Hydra had seen the likes of Hercules before. They were far more interested in their confusion over Kitsune's tales, and whether or not the third head had managed to procure baklava. Still, the hero's sudden entrance had made an impact. The heads fumbled for words, but Hercules, clearly not one to let anyone else speak when he could shout louder, wasn't paying attention. Fear not, fair maiden, Hercules declared, turning his piercing gaze on Kitsune. His eyes were wide, his posture the picture of arrogance, but more importantly, misguided heroism. I have arrived to rescue you from this vile beast. No longer will you suffer under its many heads. I, Hercules, the mighty son of Zeus, will slay this abomination and restore your honor. Kitsune's ears flicked at Hercules' words, and for a fraction of a second, her golden eyes gleamed with something darker than amusement. Then, just as quickly, the expression melted into something light and airy, like a gentle breeze that carried the scent of an approaching storm. Oh, she murmured, taking a slow step toward him. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Kitsune's tail swayed behind her, moving as though they had a mind of their own, and as she stepped forward, the air grew heavier, thicker. A slow, curling smile formed on her lips, not coy, not teasing this time, but something far older. And then she bared her fangs. Not a lot, just enough for the candlelight of the bakery to glint off of them. Just enough for Hercules' hero instincts to register that they weren't human teeth. "You think I need rescuing?" she said, voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head slightly, her golden eyes locking onto his, holding him there in the space between a smile and something infinitely less kind. "I am the danger." The Hydra, which had spent the last several minutes arguing about which of Kitsune's tales was the most important, suddenly stopped, blinking at her with a new kind of awareness. Even they seemed to sense it. Just for a second, that brief glimpse of the thing behind the mask of a playful fox. Hercules, to his credit, hesitated. Just for a moment. But of course, being Hercules, hesitation was immediately overridden by arrogance. His mind caught up to his body, and whatever flicker of instinct had warned him of a mistake was shoved aside by the only thing he had ever truly known: bravado. He gripped his club, puffed out his chest, and declared, "Well then, if you are trapped in the beast spell, fear not. I will free you, Lady Fox, no matter the cost." Kitsune's smirk returned, all traces of her previous edge smoothing back into its usual playful mirth. She sighed. "Ah, a fool to the very end. You truly are your father's son." Then in one smooth motion she grabbed a random pastry from the counter, a perfectly flaky croissant, and shoved it directly into one of the Hydra's mouths. The head choked in shock, eyes widening as it tried to process what had just happened. The entire bakery fell silent. "This," Kitsune said, turning back to Hercules with a teasing smile, "is how you handle danger." There was a beat. Then in a muffled, confused voice, the Hydra's pastry-filled head mumbled, "Wait, what just happened?" Hercules gulped. He genuinely didn't seem to know what to do with this information. And then, just as he was about to respond, whack! Croissant Shan's broom slammed into his shin, sending the mighty hero face first onto the bakery floor. The bakery's guardian, and absolute enforcer of reality-maintaining pastry law, stood over him, her expression unreadable as she leaned casually on her broom. "Not in my bakery." She punctuated each word with the same exhaustion as someone telling a cat for the 50th time to get off the counter. Hercules groaned from the floor. "Croissant Shan!" Kitsune giggled, clearly delighted. "I had no idea you were so protective of my date." Croissant Shan rolled her eyes. "I'm not. I just don't let Olympians ruin my property." She dusted her hands off, giving Hercules a flat stare. "I told you before, big guy, no rescuing people in my bakery. It's bad for business," she muttered under her breath, barely audible, but unmistakable. Master Cthulhu was right about how insufferable Olympians are. Kitsune turned back to Hercules, still sprawled on the floor. "There, you see. My hero," she said with mock sweetness. "I wasn't in any danger at all, just having a little fun, really." The Hydra, meanwhile, had resumed its argument about pies, blissfully unaware of the cosmic humiliation unfolding nearby. Hercules, completely humiliated, picked himself up, rubbing his backside with embarrassment. He opened his mouth to say something, probably to save face, but all that came out was a weak, "I was just..." "Oh, don't worry," Kitsune interrupted, her voice light with amusement. "You've done your part. You've saved me from nothing at all." She paused and gave him a charming smile. "But next time, perhaps a little less rescuing and a little more observing." The mighty hero looked between Kitsune and Croissant Shan, clearly trying to process what had just happened, while the Hydra just continued to exist as the chaotic, multi-headed disaster it was. And as for Kitsune, she was already moving on to the next phase of her little game, letting Hercules stew in his own awkwardness while she turned her attention back to the real entertainment. The Hydra's ever-distracted heads. "Ah," she said with an innocent smile, "I do love a good interruption. Now, if you've made it this far, dear listener, then I congratulate you. You've endured yet another tale of cosmic absurdity, where Olympians blunder into situations they don't understand. Fox spirits weave circles around them, and somehow, despite everything, the Hydra still hasn't figured out what's going on." Hercules, at long last, had picked himself up off the bakery floor, dusting croissant crumbs from his ridiculous lion-skin cloak. He was clearly attempting to reclaim his dignity, though considering that dignity had just been swept out from under him by a literal broom, there wasn't much left to salvage. Kitsune, meanwhile, remained perfectly composed, tail swishing behind her in languid amusement. She had already proven her point, that she was the one in control, not some muscle-bound man-child with a hero complex. That she was not prey. That she was, in fact, the danger. But the Hydra, bless its many confused heads, had not moved past the pastry situation. One of its heads, the one still chewing on the croissant Kitsune had shoved into its mouth, finally swallowed, blinking at her. "Wait," it mumbled. "Was that supposed to be a message?" Another head perked up. Oh, was it some kind of sacred offering? A gesture of devotion? A third head scoffed. No, you fools. It was a challenge, a test of our resilience." A fourth head, after several seconds of thought, solemnly concluded, "I think she's just feeding us, so we don't starve." Kitsune brought a delicate hand to her lips, laughing lightly. "You are all so precious," she purred. The Hydra's heads beamed, looking very pleased with themselves, despite the fact that they had collectively arrived at 4 different conclusions. Hercules, who had been watching all of this unfold, pinched the bridge of his nose as though trying to ward off a headache. "How is this not a threat?" he muttered to himself. "How is none of this threatening? She literally bared her fangs at me." Kitsune turned to him with a teasing tilt of her head. "Oh, sweet child," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I bared my fangs because I wanted you to know." "Know what?" Hercules grumbled. She stepped closer, eyes glittering. "That had I wanted to be dangerous," she whispered, "you wouldn't be standing here." Hercules blinked. His heroic brain seemed to be short-circuiting as it tried to process that particular revelation. And then from the side, Croissant Shan sighed. "All right," she said, rubbing her temples. "This has been fun and all, but I am done with this nonsense." She waved a hand toward the counter. "Everyone take a pastry. I don't care what. Just take one and leave before I start throwing dough at people." The Hydra, overjoyed by the prospect of more food, eagerly accepted. Hercules, who had absolutely not earned a pastry, awkwardly took one anyway, because there was no dignified way to refuse after being smacked with a broom. Kitsune, of course, did not need permission. She simply took the most delicate-looking pastry from the tray, examining it with a smirk before taking a slow, satisfied bite. The group stood there for a moment, munching on their respective baked goods in awkward silence. Finally, the Hydra, blissfully unaware of the social tension in the room, spoke up. "So, does this mean the date went well?" Kitsune took her time swallowing, then grinned. "Oh, wonderfully," she said. "I haven't been this entertained in centuries." The Hydra's heads all turned to each other, their expressions varying degrees of hopeful and self-congratulatory. "I knew it," said one. "I told you we should have offered pastries from the start," grumbled another. No, you all doubted me when I suggested feeding her," a third accused. Hercules, still reeling from his complete loss of control over the situation, threw up his hands. "I don't even know what's happening anymore." Kitsune smiled at him like a mother amused by a particularly slow child. "Then perhaps, my dear hero, it is time you stop assuming you always have to know." Hercules stared at her. Clearly, this was not the kind of lesson he had expected to learn today. Croissant Shan, meanwhile, had begun aggressively sweeping near his feet, muttering something about Olympians tracking mud into her shop. All right, Hercules sighed, stepping back towards the door. "I'll go." He turned to Kitsune, his pride still wounded, but his respect forcibly grown. "I suppose I'll leave you in peace, but just so you know, if you ever actually need help, you can call upon me." Kitsune's laughter was light, but it carried an edge of something else. "Oh, my dear hero," she mused, licking a stray crumb from her fingertip. "If I ever need help, I can assure you, you will not be the one I call." Hercules blinked. He definitely didn't know what to do with that. But before he could attempt to come back, Croissant Shan physically shoved him towards the door with the handle of her broom. "Out!" Hercules stumbled outside, and just like that, the crisis was over. The Hydra, still chewing its pastry, turned back to Kitsune. "So, do we get a second date?" Kitsune tilted her head, considering. "You may," she mused, "but next time, perhaps somewhere a little less chaotic." The Hydra's heads beamed. "We did it!" Croissant Shan groaned into her broom, and me. I watched as always, enjoying the delicious mess the multiverse continued to create. Because in the end, isn't that what it's all about? A little chaos, a little understanding, and a whole lot of entertainment. And with that, dear listeners, I leave you once more with a lesson that should be obvious by now. If you ever find yourself assuming a fox is in distress, assume again. Stress, assume again.